Hello friends, welcome back to Story Lingo English. What would you do if the next person you were told to fight was your own brother? Not a stranger, not an enemy from far away, but someone you grew up with, someone who shared your home, your memories, your blood. This is not just a story about war. This is a story about a family torn apart by one of the most brutal conflicts in American history, the American Civil War. Thomas Carter was only 19 years old when the world he knew began to fall apart. He lived on a quiet farm in Virginia, near the thin, invisible line that separated the North from the South. Life there was simple. Mornings began with the sound of roosters, days were filled with hard work in the fields, and evenings ended with family dinners under a fatting orange sky. But inside the Carter home, peace had already started to disappear. Thomas's father, Jonathan Carter, was a proud Southern man. He believed in loyalty to land, to tradition, and to his people. To him, the South had the right to defend its way of life, no matter the cost. His older brother, William, believed something very different. William had once traveled to the North, and that journey had changed him. He had seen cities where people spoke openly about freedom and unity. He had met men who believed the country should remain one nation, not split into pieces. Since then, William's voice had become stronger and more dangerous. One evening, as the family sat at the dinner table, the tension finally broke. "This cannot continue," William said, his voice steady but intense. "If we divide, we destroy everything this country stands for." Jonathan's face hardened. What this country stands for? This country was built on the rights of states. The South will not be controlled. "And what about people's freedom?" William replied. "What about justice?" Jonathan slammed his fist on the table so hard that the plates shook. "You speak like a Northerner." "I speak like an American," William answered. Silence filled the room. Thomas sat frozen between them. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know who was right. He only knew that both men he loved were now standing on opposite sides of something much bigger than their family. Weeks passed, but the arguments did not stop. Instead, they grew louder, sharper, more personal. Outside their home, the country was breaking. State after state announced it was leaving the Union. Communities split apart. Friends stopped speaking to each other. Churches divided. Even neighbors who had known each other for years now looked at each other with suspicion. And then the news came that changed everything. War had begun. The first shots had been fired. There was no turning back. Men rushed to join armies, some out of pride, some out of fear, some because they believed they were defending what was right. Others because they felt they had no choice. One morning, a rider came down the dusty road toward the Carter farm. He carried letters, official letters. Thomas watched as his father took one. Then Jonathan handed it to him. Thomas's hands trembled as he opened it. "You are hereby called to serve." The words blurred for a moment. His chest tightened. He had been chosen. He was to join the Southern Army. Jonathan placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "This is your duty, son. Our land needs you." Thomas nodded slowly, but inside something felt wrong. This didn't feel like honor. It felt like fear. William stepped forward. His expression was serious, almost sad. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Thomas looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, everyone is going?" "That doesn't make it right." Jonathan's voice rose sharply. "Enough. He is my son, and he will do what is right for his people." "And what about what is right for himself?" William replied. The two men locked eyes again, and for a moment it felt like the war had already reached their home. Thomas couldn't take it anymore. "I don't know what's right," he shouted. "I don't know who's right." The room went silent. For the first time, both his father and brother said nothing. That night, Thomas walked alone into the fields. The sky was full of stars, just like it had always been. The air was calm. The world looked the same. But everything felt different. He sat down on the ground and buried his face in his hands. How could one country become two? How could one family become divided? And the thought that scared him the most: what if he had to fight William? The next morning, Thomas made his decision. "I will go," he said quietly. Jonathan nodded with pride. But William said nothing. Instead, he walked up to Thomas and handed him something small, a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" Thomas asked. "Just read it when you need to remember who you are," William said. Thomas took it, confused but nodded. As he packed his few belongings, his mother stood quietly in the corner, tears in her eyes. "Please come back," she whispered. Thomas forced a small smile. "I will." But deep inside, he wasn't sure. Days later, Thomas stood among hundreds of young men, all dressed in rough uniforms, all carrying the same fear behind their eyes. Some joked loudly, pretending they were not afraid. Others stayed silent. A soldier next to Thomas, no older than him, leaned closer. "First time away from home?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "Me too," the soldier said with a nervous laugh. "They say this war will be over quickly." Thomas looked at him. "Do you believe that?" The soldier hesitated. "No," he said softly. Training began immediately. The days were long and exhausting. Marching, shooting, learning how to survive. The officers shouted orders constantly. There was no room for hesitation. Thomas tried to focus. He tried to believe he was doing the right thing. But at night, when everything became quiet, his thoughts returned. To his home. To his mother. To William. One evening, after a long day, Thomas finally remembered the paper his brother had given him. He opened it carefully. Inside, there was only one sentence. "No matter what uniform you wear, don't forget your heart." Thomas stared at the words for a long time. Then he folded the paper and placed it close to his chest. Weeks later, the soldiers were told to prepare. They were moving out. A real battle was coming. As Thomas stood in line holding his rifle, his hands felt cold. His heart beat faster than ever before. This was it. No more training. No more waiting. Now he would see the enemy. Now he would face the war. As the army began to march, Thomas looked ahead, not knowing that somewhere not far away, another army was preparing too. And in that army was someone he knew. Weeks later, the soldiers were told to prepare. They were moving out. A real battle was coming. As Thomas stood in line holding his rifle, his hands felt cold. His heart beat faster than ever before. This was it. No more training. No more waiting. Now he would see the enemy. Now he would face the war. The ground shook slightly as hundreds of boots began to move at the same time. Dust rose into the air. Orders echoed across the fields. Forward! Thomas stepped ahead with the others, one step at a time. Each step pulling him further away from the boy he used to be. Each step pushing him closer to something he did not fully understand. War! As the army marched toward the horizon, the sky slowly turned gray. The air felt heavier, as if even nature knew what was coming. Thomas tightened his grip on his rifle. His mind whispered one question over and over again. Who am I about to fight? And far away, beyond the trees, beyond the hills, another army was marching too. Same country, same language, same flag once, but now divided. And somewhere in that army, walking under a different flag, holding a different rifle, was a young man who looked at the same sky and was thinking about home and thinking about Thomas. The distance between them was closing, and neither of them knew that very soon fate would bring them face to face. The morning fog was thick when Thomas first heard the distant sound of drums. Not music, not celebration. War. The Southern Army had marched for days, their boots wearing down the dirt roads, their faces growing more serious with each mile. The jokes had disappeared. The laughter was gone. Now there was only silence and the quiet understanding that something terrible was getting closer. Thomas walked among them, his rifle heavy in his hands. He had not fired it at a man yet, not once. But that was about to change. Stay close, a soldier beside him whispered. It was the same young man from training Daniel. His voice trembled slightly. They say the Northern Army is just ahead. Thomas nodded but said nothing. Ahead. That word felt different now. Across the rolling fields, hidden behind lines of trees, another army was preparing. The Union soldiers. Among them stood William Carter. He looked older than when Thomas last saw him, not because time had passed, but because war had already begun to change him. His uniform was cleaner, more organized, but his eyes carried the same uncertainty. He held his rifle, checking it again and again, even though he had already done so many times. A fellow soldier nudged him. You nervous? William gave a small, honest smile. Anyone who says they're not is lying. The soldier chuckled. Fair enough. But William's thoughts were not on the enemy. They were on his family, on his mother's quiet tears, on his father's anger, and most of all, on Thomas. The battlefield was near a small river, surrounded by open land and scattered trees. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. Birds still flew above. The grass still moved with the wind. But soon all of that would disappear. Thomas's unit was ordered to stop and take position. Get ready, an officer shouted. The men moved quickly, forming lines, their movements no longer unsure. Training had turned into instinct. Thomas dropped to one knee, his heart pounding in his chest. This was real. This was happening. He could hear it now, the faint movement from the other side. The enemy was there. So close. On the other side of the field, William's unit received the same order. Hold the line, their officer commanded. William swallowed hard, his hands tightened around his rifle. He tried not to think, not to imagine faces, not to imagine Thomas. Then, for a brief moment, everything went quiet. No wind, no voices, no movement, just silence. The kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. Thomas looked across the field. Through the thin fog, he could see shadows. Men, just like him. Not monsters, not faceless enemies. Men. His chest tightened. They look like us, he thought. A loud crack shattered the silence. Then another. Then hundreds. Gunfire exploded across the field. The war had truly begun. Thomas flinched as the first shots rang out. Smoke filled the air. The sharp smell of gunpowder burned his nose. "Fire!" someone shouted. His body reacted before his mind could stop it. He lifted his rifle, aimed, closed one eye, and pulled the trigger. The recoil hit his shoulder hard. For a second, everything slowed. He didn't know if he hit anyone. He didn't want to know. All around him, chaos took over. Men shouted. Some screamed. Others fell. The peaceful field was gone, replaced by noise, smoke, and fear. Daniel fired beside him, breathing fast. "Keep going, don't stop." Thomas reloaded with shaking hands. This wasn't like training. This wasn't controlled. This was confusion. This was terror. Across the battlefield, William fired too. His movements were careful, controlled, but his eyes were searching. Searching for something he couldn't explain. Or maybe someone. A soldier next to him fell suddenly. William froze for half a second, then forced himself to keep going. This was war. Hesitation meant death. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, burning away the fog, revealing more of the battlefield and more of the horror. Bodies lay on the ground. Some still, some moving, some calling for help. Thomas's ears rang from the constant gunfire. His throat was dry. His arms ached. And then, advance. The order came suddenly. His unit began moving forward, step by step, closer to the enemy, closer to the unknown. Thomas's heart pounded louder than the gunfire. With every step, the distance between him and the other side grew smaller. He could see faces now. Clearer. Real. Too real. And then, for just a second, his eyes locked onto someone. A soldier across the field. Standing. Aiming. Frozen. The world seemed to stop. That face. It couldn't be. William lowered his rifle slightly. His breath caught in his throat. No, it wasn't possible. But it was. Through the smoke, through the chaos. He saw him. Thomas. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. In the middle of a battlefield filled with noise and death, two brothers stood facing each other, on opposite sides, wearing different uniforms, holding weapons meant for each other. Thomas's hands began to shake. William's eyes filled with something deeper than fear. For a brief moment, they were no longer soldiers. They were just brothers again, standing in a field, like they had so many times before. A shout broke the moment. Fire! The world rushed back. Gunshots exploded around them again. Someone pushed into Thomas from behind. "Move!" Daniel shouted. Thomas stumbled forward. The moment was gone. William was gone. Lost again in the chaos of war. Thomas's chest tightened as he tried to breathe. It was him. It was really him. His mind screamed, but his body kept moving. He didn't know if William was safe. He didn't know if he was hurt. He didn't know anything anymore. The battle slowly began to fade as both sides pulled back. Not because the war was over, but because they were exhausted. Broken. Shaken. The field was quiet again, but not peaceful. Never peaceful again. That night Thomas sat alone. His hands were still shaking. His uniform was dirty. His eyes were empty. Daniel sat beside him quietly. "You okay?" Thomas didn't answer at first. Then finally he spoke. "I saw him." Daniel frowned. "Saw who?" Thomas swallowed hard. "My brother." Far away, under the same dark sky. William sat alone too. His rifle rested beside him. His hands were still, but his heart was not. He whispered softly into the night. "Thomas, 2 brothers, 2 sides, 1 war." And now, they knew the truth. This was no longer just a war between North and South. This was personal. And next time, they might not be able to look away. The night after the battle felt colder than any night before. Not because of the wind, but because something inside Thomas had changed. He sat near a small fire, staring into the flames without really seeing them. Around him, wounded soldiers groaned in pain. Some called out for water. Some called out for their mothers. War no longer felt like an idea. It felt real. Too real. Thomas slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper his brother had given him. His hands were still shaking. He opened it again and read the same words. "No matter what uniform you wear, don't forget your heart." He closed his eyes. But this time, the words didn't comfort him. They hurt. Across the dark field under the same sky, William sat alone as well. The sounds of the wounded reached him too. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his head low. "I saw you," he whispered quietly, as if Thomas could somehow hear him. He remembered that moment. That impossible moment. When the smoke cleared just enough. And there he was. His younger brother. Alive. Standing across from him. Aiming a weapon. William swallowed hard. "What are we doing?" he muttered. Morning came slowly. Gray, heavy, silent. The battlefield looked different now. What had once been green and open land was now torn apart. The ground was marked with footprints, broken equipment, and still bodies. Too many bodies. Thomas walked carefully, his steps slow. He had been ordered to help gather the wounded. But his eyes searched for something else. Or someone else. Every face he passed made his heart jump. Please, not him. Suddenly, he heard a weak voice. "Help!" Thomas turned quickly. A soldier lay on the ground, barely moving. But as Thomas stepped closer, his breath caught. It was a Union soldier. A Northern uniform. The enemy. Thomas froze. The soldier looked young, no older than him. His face was pale, his breathing uneven. Their eyes met. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then the soldier whispered, "Please. Just one word. Not don't shoot. Not go away. Just, please." Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle. This was the enemy. This was the man he was supposed to fight. The man he could have shot. The man who might have tried to kill him. His mind raced. If I help him, is that betrayal? If I leave him, what does that make me? The paper in his pocket felt heavier than ever. Don't forget your heart. Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he made his choice. He dropped his rifle to the ground, kneeled beside the soldier. "It's okay," Thomas said quietly. "I've got you." The soldier looked at him in shock. "Why?" he whispered. Thomas didn't answer, because he didn't fully understand it himself. He carefully lifted the soldier's arm over his shoulder. It was harder than he expected. The man was weak, but still heavy. Step by step, Thomas began to carry him. Not toward the front, not toward the fight, but away from it. "Carter, what are you doing?" a voice shouted behind him. Thomas turned his head. It was Daniel. "That's the enemy," Daniel yelled. Thomas stood still for a moment, then said something he never thought he would say. "He's not the enemy." Daniel stared at him. "What are you talking about? He's wearing their uniform." Thomas shook his head slowly. "He's just like us." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't understand. Maybe he couldn't. But Thomas had already made his decision. And there was no going back. Hours later, Thomas sat beside a group of wounded soldiers, both Southern and Northern. For the first time since the war began, no one was fighting. No one was shouting. They were just human. Tired, broken, alive. As the sun began to set, a group of Union soldiers approached carefully. Thomas stood up slowly. His heart began to beat faster again. Was this another fight? Another moment of fear? But one of the Union soldiers stepped forward and stopped. His eyes moved across the group. Then he froze. "William." Thomas felt the world go silent again. Not like before. This time deeper. He stepped forward slowly. William did the same. No rifles raised. No orders shouted. Just two brothers walking toward each other. When they finally stood face to face, neither of them spoke at first. They just looked at each other. Really looked. As if trying to understand how they had both ended up here. On different sides of the same war. "You're alive," Thomas said quietly. William let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "So are you." A small broken smile appeared on both their faces. Then it disappeared. Because they both knew this moment wouldn't last. William glanced around. "If they see us." "I know," Thomas said. Silence again. Then Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper. "I kept it," he said. William looked at it, then back at Thomas. "You remembered." Thomas nodded slowly. "I didn't understand it before," he said, "but now I do." William's eyes softened. A distant shout broke the moment. Orders. Movement. The war was calling them back again. William stepped back. "So what do we do now?" he asked quietly. Thomas looked at him. His brother. Not his enemy. Not a target. Just his brother. "I don't know," Thomas said honestly. Then he added, "But I know one thing." He picked up his rifle, looked at it for a long moment, then lowered it again. "I won't forget who you are." William nodded. "Neither will I." They stood there for one last second, then turned away, walking back toward their own sides, their own armies, their own fates. The war would continue. More battles would come. More lives would be lost. But something had changed. Not in the war, but in them. Because now they understood the truth. This was never just a war between North and South. It was a war inside people, inside families, inside hearts. And sometimes, the hardest battle was choosing not to hate the person standing on the other side. Far above them, the sky stretched wide and endless, unchanged, watching as one nation fought itself during the American Civil War. And somewhere in that divided land, two brothers still walked forward, not as enemies, but as something war could not fully destroy: family.